Hello, everyone. I'm Christoph Laputka, and this is Leviathan Presents. It's a segment where we highlight one audio fiction creator, have a conversation, and then play a full episode of their show right here in our feed. I hope you'll enjoy today's guest, and without further ado, let's get into the interview. This is Leviathan Presents. Hello, everyone. It's Christoph, and welcome to another episode of Leviathan Presents. Today, I'm very excited to bring you the show Shadows at the Door. It's a horror anthology, and today I'm joined by the team that's put it together. I have Mr. Mark Nixon and David Ault with me. Mark is the executive producer of Shadows at the Door and the lead writer, which he started back in 2016. Mark has been writing eerie stories of ghosts and the supernatural for a long time now and has appeared in dramatic podcasts like the No Sleep podcast and The Lift, and is a champion of quiet horror. And of course, I'm joined by David Ault, who I'm just going to admit might be my favorite person in the audio drama universe. David is an incredibly talented and accomplished voice actor and producer. You might know David from his titular role as Byron in the Byron Chronicles, for which he won Best Actor at the Audioverse Awards. And you've also heard his performances in the No Sleep podcast. And he was also the lead in Colonial Radio Theater's presentation of Moonfleet and War of the Worlds. He co-hosts the Sonic Society podcast. And most importantly of all, he's voiced many roles for the Leviathan Chronicles, including that of Mayor Sinter. Gentlemen, welcome to Leviathan Presents.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Can you believe it's been 13 and a half years since New York City and the Leviathan Soapbox episode that we did?
Oh my God. We haven't aged today.
We haven't. No. I've got the same amount of hair.
We have our same voices. Yes. You never grow old in audio drama. That's one of the beautiful things.
Such a forgiving medium.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Mark, why don't you start by telling us, what is Shadows of the Door all about, and how did it get started?
Yeah, so Shadows at the Door, you mentioned quiet horror earlier, and sometimes there's some controversy in kind of subcategorizing horror. It's such a broad church, but the way that I like to put it is I just think there is nothing more powerful and more useful to a storyteller than your readers, listeners, viewers' imagination. We look at things like Alien and Jaws, and they're so effective because we barely see the thing. Granted, that was due to budgetary constraints and a shark that didn't want to do what it was told, but it makes those things so useful, and that's what I love about audio, is that I can feed all of the hints, all of the suggestion, and the audience will fill in all of those blanks. So that is so close to the chest of Shadows at the Door and how we do things. And then it makes it sound like all of our stories are quite tame, and we've actually done some quite shocking episodes as well, which is sometimes hard to justify when you're branding yourself this way. But it's and I think it just goes back to horror just being that broad church. You can do so much with it. It is such a wonderful genre for that reason, and we can put so much heart in it and then take that heart out and throw it away.
Give it a squeeze first and maybe rip into it with your teeth a little bit, then throw it away.
Yeah, a little nibble.
Well, Shadows at the Door is an anthology. There's stories that you adapt. Mark, you're the lead writer. How do you select the stories that you choose for Shadows at the Door? What attracts you to a narrative to bring it to audio?
Well, initially when I started Shadows at the Door, it was very much that I was aware of some stories that were just so cool. And I was like, how does everyone in the world not know Charles Dickens' The Signalman? And I was just so keen to introduce that to people. And I had such an amazing actor who I thought, this is a story, like The Signalman's a great example. It's a story with two characters, and I have a guy here who can do both so well. And so with the classics that we adapt, it's always, because we will adapt classics and we'll bring new stories, and a lot of the new stories are my own, and then there are guest writers whose work I'm aware of. I'm like, these writers are fantastic, I want everyone to know about them, or I really want to work with this writer. So it's a combination. It's basically, this is cool, hey everyone, look at this cool thing. But it does have to follow the rules, I would say, of supernatural and the suggestion, and we're not afraid to go violent or gory, but it has to be done in small doses. I think like many things in life, less is more.
Well, I think that's evident in the episode that we're going to be hearing today. David is the lead actor, and I thought your performance was both restrained but you feel the fear growing as your character tells the tale.
It's just about being British, being restrained, and being afraid of absolutely everything around because there's something lingering in the doom on the horizon. What I found is that Mark has provided me with a huge range of absolutely wonderful characters to explore, right away from things like The Signalman and the M.R. James classics that he's adapted through to the new works. There was one Pit Village where I got to play the entirety of a village and a couple that had moved into the house, this house in the village, in this sort of hostile atmosphere, because we don't like newcomers up here. And we are proudly Northern and proudly British in that sort of sense. And one of the things that was the sort of shtick, if you like, the USP, was that I was the entire cast for season 1. So it's all me. And then in season 2, Mark said, I'm going to have to bring in some female voices here. And I said, but we've all watched Monty Python. We know what a woman sounds like. It sounds like this. And it's like, why can't I do it? Why not? And so we were wonderfully blessed with people like Ilana Chanel, my arch nemesis from No Sleep, Erica Sanderson, and many others. So the way I approach things is I look at the cornucopia of wonderful writing that Mark sends me, and then just get stuck in.
You mentioned writing, and Mark, we were talking a little bit before the interview of how Shadows at the Door really came about. Its original iteration wasn't necessarily with audio, but it was really from your passion of creative writing. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about how that started and the evolution into an audio drama anthology.
Of course, yeah. So I was just getting back in touch with creative writing as an adult. I had very much wanted to do this as a child, but unfortunately, it was kind of beaten out of me figuratively. That wasn't going to be a career option for me from, like schools, family, and all this thing. So I was just getting back into it as an adult, and I wanted to write for the sake of writing. And I just put them on a website for a few friends to read. But that website got more traffic than I thought, and it started picking up. And then I had guest writers sending me in, and I would put the best on the site. And then eventually I thought, well, you know what? Let's do this properly. Let's make a book. And crowdfunded, becoming a small press, Shadows at the Door Publishing, and created this wonderful book, of which there are very few copies left. But the audiobook did very well. And continues to do well. And it just started reminding me of all of the audio drama that I would listen to as a child and a teenager. I would go to the local library, rent the cassettes, and then, please don't tell Stockton Council, but I would then copy the cassettes by recording them as well. and then it just my writing was always like this less is more approach, and I thought audio drama is perfect for this. And the minute I started making my first audio drama, it just felt so natural, and it felt like this is my thing, this is my niche. And that was around 2018.
And it was then that book, because I met Mark at HorrorCon, and he sold me a book, and then we got talking, and he said, I'd like to do these in audio, and I said, that sounds good to me. And that is basically how the podcast got started.
Yeah, our eyes met across a crowded trading hall.
Absolutely, yeah. and in your introduction, actually, Christoph, you sort of missed out everything else that Mark does as executive producer. He basically does everything, like everything from social media to the editing to the Foley to the he is a one-man behemoth of audio drama. Producing this quiet British horror, and it was a joke between. Well, it probably wasn't a joke to him, but it was a joke to me. That I would sort of do my 40 minutes work, and then that was it. The episode would come out, but Mark was the one doing everything, and his skills have really gone from strength to strength.
Well, that's a great segue about talking about the production process, because as we've talked about in previous episodes of Leviathan Presents, so much goes into the creation. It's not just speaking into Mike, but the mixing, the music, the writing, the adaptation, and that's not even speaking about all the promotion. Mark, can you kind of take us through your creative process, starting with the selection of the story and what goes into adapting a story that you like into the microphone.
I am very much a film fan. And so when I started getting into audio drama, I would just close my eyes and imagine it in a visual setting. And I think one of the best examples I can give to you of how this process works is that I was working with the great Jamie Flanagan on a short story that Jamie had. And we were going to adapt this into audio. And it was set in a retirement home, and it was a full prose story, and it talked about how there was one of the patients was just ranting and mumbling the Declaration of Independence from his room, and it just said, "I can always hear this guy," and then immediately I could just hear this very distressed voice just constantly in the background mumbling it out of order with that echo reverberating through the hallway, and then the opening paragraph of the story is a care worker walking down a long corridor. I thought, great, that will get louder and softer as we walk past it. And then I remember just shaking the writer and saying, this is what we must do. It will sound so good. And then I think the great thing about being the lead writer and the sound designer is that I can not get lazy in the script, but like I'll put all the sound design into the script, and then when I'm producing it, I'm like, well, I'll have a car go past at this moment. Oh, and the driver's listening to techno music, and then I can just add all of these details in that I may not have thought of in the writing process. But I will say as well, the longest part of any episode is the sound design, the production. I used to say that it would take a week to do an episode, and that's just not true, especially as our stories get longer. And so many of my emails to David are sent at about 3 a.m. And but I then send it to Nico Vitesi, who is our composer, and he's done the music to every episode, and he's amazing. I want to say he's gone from strength to strength, but every episode he sends me, I almost say, Nico, you've outdone yourself. And he's just constantly doing so brilliantly. Yeah, it's just an honor to work with him, and we've developed this really good way of me directing him, and him just, it's very rare that we need to do many touch-ups to the music once it comes in.
Well, I think you brought up a great element of what you guys create, which is the music. In visual movies, you can scare people with gore and everything else, but it's so much more subtle when it's with audio. And one of the things I loved about listening to Shadows at the Door were these great music cues that you guys built in, and the sense of foreboding atmosphere that Nico, your composer, created. And it's just the right suggestive nudge that the music gives you, that just, you can feel the hairs kind of going up on the back of your neck. So the episode we're listening to today was written by M.R. James. And tell the listeners a little bit about the story they're going to be hearing today.
So, A Warning to the Curious is a story written in the early 20th century, and it was kind of written as a response to the author having just seen a lot of his friends go off to the front and not come back.
And this is in World War I.
World War I, yes, sorry. M.R. James himself was very much a repressed character. He was an Eton man, the most famous private public school, however you want to call it, in England. Then he was dean of one of the colleges in Cambridge, King's College, and he let people into his life, but he very much had his walls up, and there's a lot of theories about him being what they call a non-practicing homosexual. And there's something about that I see in so much of his stories, this longing to connect, but also being very scared of it. And in so many of James's stories, the fear comes from being like touched unexpectedly. And he wrote like this essay on what makes a good horror story. And it's like along the lines of, let the thing appear unobtrusively, throughout the story, throughout the story, let the viewer or the audience not realize what they've seen until it comes in what we call with the Jamesian wallop, where the story just like really goes from 0 to 60 in that bit at the end. And with Warning to a Curious, James was a bit of a snob, being a lifelong academic. And this is a story which it's very much stay in your lane. Don't do amateur archaeology when you're on holiday. And it is a story of a man who seeks out a crown which is said to protect England from the Danes and the French and the Germans. And in removing this protective crown, he incurs the wrath of the ghost that was guarding it. Well, I say he because in the original story it's a man, and whenever I look at these stories from James, I love them, but they are full of a lot of what we what we call waffle, a lot of filler, and a lot of background information and academic stuff. And it is interesting, but you can really tune out as you're listening to it. So I try and fine tune it. And I thought I would much rather see an interesting story about this woman, this feminist type, as she's described in the story, who turns up and incurs the wrath of the ghost. And I wanted to lean into what I see in these stories. And I made the protagonist a man who had loved another man for most of his life. You know, I'm a very proud queer writer, so I like to see more of this in stories as well. And it seems to resonate with our listeners very well.
Absolutely. And David, you did such a great job of embodying, I mean, I guess essentially James himself. How did you approach the role, and what were the things that you tried to convey in looking at this historical piece, but also, you know, trying to almost give more voice to what James left unsaid?
How did I approach being a repressed gay academic?
David, you need to convince them that you're a very good actor.
Okay, sorry, yes. I've mentioned previously about how a lot of it is in the writing. The writing speaks for itself and speaks through the actors. So for me, when I was looking and approaching this script, as you say, it's about trying not to say what the character desperately wants to say. I know I am on dodgy ground here because society would extirpate me if it knew, but I still want to be a part of society, even though it's thin ice. I think that's the case whether it's 2020, 1920, 1620, or whatever that. It's a very human thing to want to be a part of a group, but then to have that knowledge that if they knew something about you, you'd be gone.
And I think you did this really great job in the episode of conveying like these little code words that were used at the time to convey the relationships back then. And I remember you guys talking a little bit about it after the episode. And it's one of the things that our listeners should know. After each episode of Shadows at the Door, there's a wonderful discussion with Mark and David discussing both the episode and also some of the philosophy behind it. But you guys talked about when James is talking about his travels with his friend, and if two women went together, they'd be sisters. And these were just coded words that people used at the time to, I mean, honestly, it's probably to make all the straight people feel comfortable, you know, more than anything else.
It's giving an excuse for, and it's a very British excuse of, oh, we don't need to think about them possibly being gay because they're colleagues or they're brothers or sisters or whatever. So I don't need to think about that because there's this excuse.
We wouldn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable, would we?
Absolutely.
And more than that, it was at the time of the story, it was actually a crime for two men to have sex. So, and I think that was only repealed. Was it 66?
I thought it was 73.
Oh, well, there you go. Later than I thought. But just to quickly add, David's character in the introduction, as he's about to kind of give us a setup for the story, he sounds so polite and so nice, but so sad. It's so subtle. And then the moment we fade into the story, he sounds like a different man because David's like, oh, hello. Nothing bad's happened to me yet. And I'm doing him an injustice, but David's basically playing two different characters in that story when he's not for once.
You also did a gender swap of one of the main characters. You touched on that before. Tell me a little bit about that decision for Paxton. Tell a little bit about her character. It was his character when it was originally written.
Yeah, so Paxton in the original story is an overly confident man who just reckons he can solve this old mystery. He actually does. And then he immediately regrets what he's done, and he's struggling to get people to believe him. And these, to me, are very typical male traits. And I'm just more interested in each time we do an adaptation of just doing something a little bit different. What kind of Shadows at the Door edge can we do to that? And I thought there's no reason why this couldn't be a woman. And sometimes writers, when writers want to gender swap a character in that time, they'll make them completely infallible because, you know, oh, well, if it's, if it's any other gender but a man, I need to make sure that they're really infallible. I thought, no, other genders are capable of making these terrible mistakes as well. But then I noticed the moment I made Paxton a woman, just the realization of her hubris just became so clear. And I dare say, to me, it makes more sense that she gets there quicker than maybe the male Paxton would have done. And I also knew that Alana Chanel, the actor playing Paxton, could nail this role because Alana is fantastic. And that's not her. Like, she's Australian. Yeah, and she's just doing such a good job of this prim and proper English character. and I absolutely adore her performance in this.
It's your whole cast does a great job on it.
Mhm.
Tell our listeners a little bit about the upcoming season of Shadows at the Door and what's coming next for your studio.
Yeah, so we are currently on a mid-season break of season 3. We've had some incredible stories from some amazing guest writers in the season so far, and some from myself. In the second half of the season, we have some more classic adaptations. We're finally tackling Lovecraft. Our listeners have been asking us to for a while, and I thought the best thing about Lovecraft is the thing that his work inspired. So I'll need to find some stories of his that I like, and thankfully I found one that really resonates with me, that I remembered. And we have another James adaptation, and we're doing a period piece. We have an episode set, give you a little bit of a scoop, during the Norwegian occupation in World War II. And I'm very excited for that story. And we'll be ending the season with a feature-length episode of a recurring character of my own that David plays so beautifully, called Jeffrey Troughton. He started off as like a very M.R. James type of protagonist, and it's been so fun to watch this man not be able to deny the existence of ghosts anymore. And now he's actively seeking them out. And what I'm doing is putting him in America to chase a legendary story. And it's at the moment it's going to come in at probably about 2 hours 15 minutes. With a cast of 27 actors.
That's so great.
It's
How have you found most of your cast so far, besides David being one of the greatest networking sources in all of audio drama?
Yeah, I mean, like, you need 20 characters. David can play 12 of them, so that's quite good. But David has been keen to connect me with actors who he really loves, such as Erica Sanderson, Jake Benson, and Alana Shalnell. We connected at a podcast convention, so that they fell into my lap when I was looking for more actors. Like, oh, this is quite fortuitous. And then, funnily enough, I have in the past, when Twitter worked a little bit, I could do casting calls on Twitter, and you would get a tidal wave of applications and people who didn't necessarily read the brief. But I have met incredible actors who are in various stages of their career. And I actually just cast this chap who's in the American feature-length one, and he has a small role in this one. And I emailed him and said, "You're fantastic. I want to see you in more of our productions." Unfortunately, Twitter doesn't really work anymore. So while that ship sinks. But for example, I'm doing a production set in Sweden. We are adapting Count Magnus, an M.R. James story, which is set there. And I've been struggling to connect with Swedish voice actors, but I've been working with an actor, Karen Heimdall, who is also a podcast voice acting legend. And she basically just went through all of Sweden, it seems, and gave me a list of amazing actors to connect with. So I think it's not being afraid to ask people, do you know anyone who's brilliant? Because I know for a fact, if you ask me, I'm going to give you a list of at least 20 people. I might hire them. They're brilliant.
So, Mark, as we're winding down, if you could adapt any horror story in the world, copyright and budget to the wind, what would be your ultimate joy to bring to both horror fans and audio drama fans?
Every year I check to double check when Robert Aikman died, and his copyright doesn't expire for so long. But recently I've been musing on Who Goes There. This is the novella that became The Thing from Another Planet, and then John Carpenter's The Thing. And I love snowy horror. I would absolutely love to have a go at that. And frankly, I would love to work with I Am Legend. I think I Am Legend would work so well in audio, when every night the vampires surround his house and ask him to come outside. That would sound so good. But unfortunately, I think the copyright doesn't expire on that for like 40 years. What about you?
Oh, for me, my predilections move towards science fiction. So to me, I'd love to honestly see Battlestar Galactica come into audio drama, because I think there's so many stories that you could tell off of that, of people's individual struggles, of being in space, the premise of mankind as a species being refugees. And also, I think from an audio perspective, the claustrophobia of being in a tin can in space, the Cylons, you can do such great audio design with their voices. There have been some great stuff with that. And you've also got like great space battles that I think you could do really creatively. If you're listening, Ron Moore, and you want someone to adapt Battlestar Galactica to an audio drama, give us the call. I know David, and David knows great actors.
As long as I can be Gaius, I don't mind.
Well, listen, you guys, it has been such a pleasure to have you here. It's been a pleasure to listen to Shadows at the Door, such an intimate form of horror. I mean, horror podcasts are, there's a lot of them out there, but I think what Mark and David, you two have created is really distinctive and eerie and gets you by the feels. Where can our listeners find and support Shadows at the Door? And if they like what they hear, where can they keep listening?
You can find Shadows at the Door wherever you listen to podcasts. If people would like to donate to the running costs of the show, and that's the thing, we put all of our episodes out in full for free for everyone because David and I very much value just sharing art, and it is not perhaps the most it's not the most successful business model.
Not the most lucrative, no.
But it's one that makes us feel warm and fuzzy. Yeah, that's it, yeah. And I'm currently having a go at doing this full time, which is, as we all know, tricky. So, so if people would like to donate as a one-off, we have a Ko-fi account. It's KO-FI. And we also can be found on Patreon at Shadows at the Door Productions. From as little as £4 a month, you get access to an ad-free feed, loads of behind-the-scenes info, and then very silly bonus episodes when one of us gets drunk and tries to tell a Stephen King story from start to finish from memory. And I'm not an actor, and I still do all the voices. So,
it is very good. Your Pet Cemetery is fantastic.
Thank you. I'll resist doing the voice now.
But yeah, so there's all those the drunk ghost stories and various other things. Special access to the Discord over and above the sort of normal access to the Discord. But yes, and we are also on all of the social medias, right the way from sinking ships to talking ticks. So,
well, we'll be listing all of those links in the show notes below, so definitely check them out. Mark and David, thank you so much for being on Leviathan Presents. And for all of our listeners, now we're very excited to listen to A Warning to the Curious, one of the episodes from the horror anthology Shadows at the Door. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 8. I'm your host, Mark Nixon. Now, it'll come as no surprise to you that I've read a lot of ghost stories. In fact, I couldn't possibly hazard a guess at how many, and if I'm feeling rather pretentious, I would dare to call myself a connoisseur. Now, at this point, you'd be wondering, why am I showing off? Because I'd like you to consider the gravity of the following statement. Today's ghost story is one of the best I've ever read. The story has a wonderful title, A Warning to the Curious, and was written by none other than M.R. James. Come on, this is Shadows at the Door. Of course it was going to be him. This story was written after World War I. James didn't fight because he was the provost of King's College in Cambridge. The university provided a stream of men for the war, many of whom James knew personally, and sadly, many of these men didn't return. Not only this, but the fields of Cambridge were offered as a field hospital for wounded soldiers. James would wander the hospital and be exposed to the horrors of war secondhand as he saw the injuries of the men and the terror in their eyes. I mention this because sadness is woven into the very fabric of this story, and the context in which it was written will no doubt enhance your experience. But it's not all doom and gloom today. Join David and I after the story for a discussion, and you can even hear a snippet of the time I spoke with the ultimate M.R. James fan, Mark Gatiss. But for now, gather around the fire, pour yourself some tea, and we'll begin.
Are you sure I can't get you a cup of tea? No? Very well. It's remarkable how uncomfortable an Englishman can be when his company declines tea. Well, I shall enjoy mine all the same. Earl Grey, you know, marvellous stuff. You see, that's bergamot you can smell. A little cornflower and, yes, a flutter of lemon. Oh, lovely. The thing is, you must never have it with milk. It destroys it completely. Look, are you sure you don't? Sorry, this really is a force of habit. But yes, I promised you the story, didn't I? Let's see. Well, cast your mind to the east coast. Specifically, the place I ask you to consider is the town Sebra. It's not very different now from what I remember it to have been when I was a child. The marshes intersected by embankments to the south, recalling the early chapters of Great Expectations. Then flat fields to the north, merging into woodland. And, of course, a long seafront by the town with a spacious church behind it. Yes. I remember the bells of the church very well. The railway ran down to its little terminus farther along from here, just near an old windmill. And I know I encumber you with such details. The truth is, it's the kind of place that causes these details to spill forth when spoken about. In fact, just indulge a little longer, if you would be so kind. So, walk away from the sea and the town, past the station, and turn up the road on the right. It's a sandy road, parallel with the railway, and if you follow it, it climbs to somewhat higher ground. And on the left, going northward, is an area of uncultivated land, while on your right, toward the sea, is a belt of old fir trees, wind-beaten, thick at the top, with that slope all seaside trees have. Seen from the skyline from the train, you would tell in an instant, if you did not already know it, that you were approaching a windy coast. Well, on top of that little hill, a line of firs strikes out and runs towards the sea. There is a ridge that goes that way, and the ridge ends in a rather well-defined mound commanding the level fields of rough grass, and a little knot of fir trees crowns it. And here you may sit on a hot spring day, very well content to look at blue sea and white windmills, red cottaged bright green grass, church tower and distant Martello Tower on the south. As I said, I knew Sebra as a child, but a gap of a good many years separates my early knowledge from that which is more recent. Still, it keeps its place in my affections. Well, that is to say, it used to. But of course, this is why you are here. I used to go to Sebra quite regularly for golf. I went with, well, back then we would have been called friends. Yes. There was a particular hotel that we always stayed in, and we always chose the same 2 rooms. They had an interior door between them, so you could rent 2 rooms but walk freely between them without entering the hall. There was also a sitting room downstairs we rather enjoyed and would spend many a happy evening there. Since he died, I haven't cared to go back, and we never did anyhow after the particular thing that happened. That happened on our last visit. It was a decade or so ago now, early spring, and by some chance we found ourselves almost the only people in the hotel. So the ordinary public rooms were practically empty, and we were the more surprised when, after dinner, the sitting room door opened and A young woman popped her head in. She was a rather rabbity, anemic subject. Light hair and light eyes, but not unpleasing. She was dressed smartly in tweed and asked rather politely if the room was private. Naturally, we did not growl, and was it Henry? It doesn't matter. One of us invited her to take a seat. She was ever so thankful, and in fact seemed quite relieved. It was unusual, more then than it is now, to find a woman travelling solo, never mind one as young as her. She was very much one of those feminist types with an air of good education behind her. Stranger still was the fact she seemed eager for company. She seemed a reasonably kind person, so we urged her to make herself at home. Soon, with the standard pleasantries out of the way, it became clear to me that after a few minutes this visitor of ours was in rather a nervous state, and as this became more clear, I put away my book and gave her my full attention. How did she start again? You'll think it very odd of me, but the fact is
I've had something of a shock.
Perhaps a stiff drink is the ticket?
Well, that's your solution to everything.
Shush.
Well, joking aside, we have plenty to spare if you'd care to join us.
No, thank you. We're fine. Aren't we, James?
Yes, fine. Mm-hmm.
Do you need anything from the staff?
No, thank you.
Yes, all fine here. Thank you.
Are you quite all right?
Yes, Calm yourself. I'm Paxton, by the way. Karina Paxton.
Pleased to meet you, Paxton. I'm James King, and this is Henry Long.
A pleasure.
Oh, yes. I saw your names on the check-in list.
Yes, of course.
So could I ask you for a word of advice?
By all means.
Of course.
Thank you. But first, some context. More than a week ago, I cycled over to Froston to see the church. I studied architecture, and it's got one of those pretty porches with niches and shields. I took a photograph of it, and then an old man who was tending to the grounds came and asked if I'd like to see inside. Of course, I jumped at the chance. There wasn't much inside, but I told him it was nice enough and very clean, but nothing eclipsed the porch. So on that topic, he asked if I knew the meaning of the coat of arms.
Would this be the 3 crowns?
The very same. I wasn't familiar, but the old man told me it was the old arms of the Kingdom of East Anglia. He pressed if I knew the meaning, and when I admitted I didn't, he took the mick a little, if I'm honest. But he did let me know they represented the 3 holy crowns buried by the coast to keep the Germans from landing over the years. We were then joined by the rector, and the old man recruited him immediately to confirm his story of the crown. I know I'm rambling here.
Oh, no, by all means.
Are you sure?
Please, continue.
Okay, so we spoke a little while. Well, they spoke at me, and the rector initially seemed reluctant to go into much detail, yet the old man pressed on. By this point, I was curious enough to actually encourage it myself, if only to see why the old man was so excited. Eventually, the rector filled me in on the local legend of the 3 crowns. Are you familiar?
No.
Well, this was his point. Nobody seemed to know it anymore.
Me neither.
The old story said that these 3 crowns were buried in different places near the coast to keep off the Danes or the French or the Germans. They said that one of the 3 was dug up a long time ago and another disappeared by the encroaching sea, so that there was only one left still doing its work, keeping off invaders. And, well, I looked into it.
Oh, yes?
Yeah. In 1687, a crown was dug up at Rendlesham on the coast, and I do believe this is one of the 3 supposedly holy crowns. Then on the south coast, there was a Saxon royal palace which is now under the sea. So there, perhaps, was the 2nd crown. And up beyond these 2, they said, lay the 3rd.
Did they say where it is?
Sort of. It all came to light with the mention of the name of William Ager.
And who might that be?
Well, These Acres are a very old name in these parts, I was told. Apparently they didn't seem to be people of quality or big landowners. No, instead their family seems to be the guardians of the last crown.
I see.
The first one known was Nathaniel Ager, born and raised here, and was said to have camped out at the location of the crown during the whole of the War of 1870. William, his son, did the same, it seems, during the South African War, and young William, his son, who only died fairly recently, took lodging at the cottage nearest the spot. This seemed to hasten his end, for he was consumptive apparently. The man just wasted away. This is by exposure and night watching, you understand. And he seemed to be the last. So the last of the Holy Crowns no longer had a guardian. You can imagine how interested I was in all this.
Well, naturally.
And as I left, the only thing I could think of was how to hit upon the spot where the crown was supposed to be. Only now I wish I'd left it alone.
Oh?
It was fate, perhaps. As I circled back past the churchyard, my eye caught a fairly new gravestone, and on it was the name William Ager, who had indeed died quite recently. I travelled into town and asked around about the man. A little judicious questioning in the right place, and I could perhaps find the cottage. And of course by then I was determined, after all, find the cottage.
Find the crown.
Precisely. And yes, fate would strike again when I found myself in the bookshop. They had some old books by Ager that had found their way to them after his death, and I found this, Ager's prayer book. Nathaniel Ager is my name, and England is my nation. Seaborough is my dwelling place, and Christ is my salvation. When I am dead and in my grave, and all my bones are rotten, I hope the Lord will think on me when I am quite forgotten. This was dated 1754, and there were many more entries of Ager's, Nathaniel, Frederick, William, and so on, ending with our William just last year. You see, anybody would call it the greatest bit of luck. I mean, I did. But I don't now. And of course, I asked the shopkeeper about the cottage, and of course, she knew just where the cottage was. And so, of course, off I went.
I'm going to assume you found the place.
Of course I did. At this point, I'm convinced the very stars would have aligned to guide me there. All I had to do was dig for the thing. Now I know something about digging in these barrows. I've opened many of them in the down country. But that was in broad daylight and with men to help. I had to prospect very carefully here before I put a spade in. Still, the soil was very light and easy, and there was already a rabbit hole that might be developed into a sort of tunnel. I spent all night out there. I made my tunnel, supported it and filled it once I was done. But the main thing is, I got the crown.
Good Lord, really? Oh, that's incredible.
No man alive has even seen a Saxon crown. Why, this is fantastic.
The worst of it is, I don't know how to put it back.
Put it back?
My dear lady, you've made one of the most exciting finds ever heard of in this country.
Indeed.
What's the difficulty? Of course it ought to go to a museum, but if you're worried about the owner of the land and treasure trove and all that, I can certainly help you through that. Oh, no one's going to make a fuss about technicalities in a case of this kind.
I don't understand, no. I don't know how to put it back.
You'll forgive me, I hope, if I seem impertinent. But are you quite sure you've got it?
Well, yes, I was going to ask the same thing. I hadn't dared, unlike my bold partner here.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I have it here, in my room, locked up in my bag. You can come and look at it if you like. I won't bring it downstairs.
Well, all right then. We were not likely to let the chance slip. We went with her. Her room was only a few doors off from ours. The staff were collecting shoes in the passage, or so we thought. Afterwards, we were not sure. Paxton was in a worse state of shivers than before, and went hurriedly into the room and beckoned us after her. She turned on the light and shut the door carefully. Then she unlocked her kit bag and produced a bundle of clean pocket handkerchiefs in which something was wrapped. She laid it on the bed and undid it. I can now say I have seen an actual Anglo-Saxon crown. It was of silver, as the Rendlesham one is always said to have been, and it was set with some gems, mostly antique intaglios and cameos, and was of rather plain, although almost rough workmanship. In fact, it was like those you see on the coins and in the manuscripts. I found no reason to think it was later than the 9th century. I was intensely interested, of course, and I wanted to turn it over in my hands, but Paxton prevented me. She ordered me not to touch it, and with a sigh that was, I declare to you, dreadful to hear, she took it up and turned it about so that we could see every part of it. Once asked if we had seen enough, we nodded. She then wrapped it up and locked it in her bag and stood looking at us dumbly. Long offered that she come back downstairs and tell us what the trouble was, but strangely enough she asked us to go first and see if the coast was clear. We were almost amused by the request. We had not been suspicious in any way, and the hotel, as I said, was practically empty. However, Long and I were beginning to have inklings of, well, I don't know what it was, and anyhow, nerves are infectious. So we did go, first peering out as we opened the door, and fancying that a shadow, or more than a shadow, but it made no sound, passed from before us to one side as we came out into the passage. However, at the time we didn't recognize the importance of what we had just seen. No, instead we whispered to Paxton that it was all right. Whispering seemed the proper tone. And we went with her between us back to the sitting room. I was preparing, when we got there, to be ecstatic about the unique interest of what we had seen, to forget the shadow in the hallway, but when I looked at Paxton, I saw that would be terribly out of place, and I left it to her to begin.
What is to be done?
Or why not find out who the owner of the land is?
No. In fact, you have been very kind. But don't you see? It has to go back. And I don't go at night again, and the daytime is impossible. And, well, the truth is, I've never been alone since I first touched it.
What? Oh, look, my dear.
No, shush. I think I do see, perhaps. But wouldn't it be a relief to tell us more clearly what the situation is?
Perhaps. Perhaps not. Okay. But pull your chairs forward, I will not say it loudly. It began when I was first prospecting. There was always somebody there. A man, standing by one of the fir trees. This was in daylight, you know. He was never in front of me. I always saw him with the tail of my eye on the left or the right, and he was never there when I looked straight for him. I would lie down for quite a long time and take careful observations and make sure there was no one. And then when I got up to dig again, there he was. And from what I could tell, he was weak, gaunt, but I didn't dare face up to him. And when I was making the tunnel, of course, he was worse. And had I not been so keen on the crown, then I should have dropped everything and ran for it. It was like somebody was scraping at my back all the time. I thought for the longest time it was only soil dropping on me, but as I got nearer the crown, it was unmistakable. And when I actually laid it bare and got my fingers on the crown and pulled it out, there came a sort of cry behind me. Christ! I can't describe to you both how desolate it was, and horribly threatening too. It spoilt all pleasure in my discovery immediately. And if I hadn't been the wretched fool that I am, well, I should have put the thing back and left it. But I didn't, did I? The rest of the time was just awful. I had hours to get through before I could decently come back to the hotel. First I spent time filling up my tunnel and covering my tracks, and all the while he was there trying to thwart me. Sometimes, you see him, and sometimes you don't. It's just as he pleases, I think. I think he's there, but he has some power over your eyes. Well, I wasn't off the spot very long before sunrise, and then I had to get back to the train for Zebra. And though it was coming to daylight, I don't know if that made it much better. There were always hedges or gorse bushes or park fences along the road. Always cover is what I mean. And I was never easy for a second. And then when I began to come across people going to work, they always looked behind me very strangely. It might have been that they were surprised at seeing anyone so early, but I didn't think that then, and I do not think that now. They didn't look exactly at me. And the porter at the train was like that too. The guard held open the door after I got on the carriage, just to see would if there was somebody else coming, you see. And this crown, even if I do put it back, he won't forgive me. I can tell that. And I was so happy a fortnight ago.
Well, you can imagine how useful we were in front of a crying woman. Eventually, Long spattered me to help, and all I could do was approach her and pat her thrice on the back. Strangely, such a gesture didn't garner much response. But in truth, we didn't know what to say. Neither of us were any good at this sort of thing. But we felt we must come to her rescue somehow, and so it seemed the only thing we could do was to offer to help put the crown back, seeing as she was so set on it. And though at this point we didn't know how exactly to take the story, it did seem the right thing to do. If these horrid consequences had come on this poor woman, might there not really be something in the original idea of the crown having some curious power bound up with it to guard the coast? At least that was my feeling, and I dare say it was Long's too. And I suspect you're feeling the same right about now. Yes? Yes. It may come as no surprise to you to learn that this suggestion was very welcome to Paxton. The question was, when could we do it? It was nearing 10:30. Could we contrive to make a late walk that very night? We looked out of the window. There was a brilliant full moon, the Paschal moon. It was as clear a night as one could hope for. Paxton had spoken of fate, and it seemed yet again the stars were aligning to accommodate her. Knowing what happened next, and thinking back now, it is hard not to assign importance to such things. Or perhaps man looks for design in an indifferent and random universe. I remain uncertain of such things. Long undertook to retrieve all the boots. Paxton brought her coat but didn't put it on. Instead, she wrapped it around the crown and carried it under her arm. The staff of the hotel watched us as we headed for the seafront in the dead of night. We must have seemed so strange to them. And so we were off on this strange brand before we had time to think how very much out of the way it was. I have told you this part quite shortly on purpose, for it really does represent the haste with which we settled our plan and took action. Well, there was nobody about. Nobody at all. Zebra out of the season is it's a very quiet place. I confess to having thought that there might be someone out there who might be conscious of our business, but if it was so, they were also conscious that one who was on their side, so to say, had us under surveillance, and we saw no sign of them. But under observation we felt we were, as I have never felt it at another time. Especially was it so when we passed out of the churchyard into a narrow path with close high hedges, through which we hurried and so got out into open fields. Then along hedges, though I would sooner have been in the open, where I could see if anyone was visible behind me over a gate or two, and then a swerve to the left, taking us up on the ridge which ended in that mound. As we neared it, Henry felt, and I felt too, that there were what I can only call dim presences waiting for us, as well as a far more actual one attending us. Of Paxton's agitation all this time I can give you no adequate picture. She breathed like a hunted beast, and we could not either of us look at her face. How she would manage when we got to the very place we had not troubled to think. She had seemed so sure that that would not be difficult. Nor was it. I never saw anything like the dash with which she flung herself at a particular spot in the side of the mound, tore at it, so that in a very few minutes the greater part of her body was out of sight. We stood holding the coat and that bundle of handkerchiefs and looking very fearfully, I must admit, about us. There was nothing to be seen. A line of dark firs behind us made one skyline, more trees and the church tower half a mile off on the right, cottages and a windmill on the horizon on the left, calm sea dead in front. Faint barking of a dog at a cottage on a gleaming dike between us and it. Full moon making that path we know across the sea. The eternal whisper of the Scotch firs just above us and of the sea in front. Yet, in all this quiet, an acute, an acrid consciousness of a restrained hostility very near us, like a dog on a leash that might be let go at any moment.
Here we are. Give it to me.
Okay, let me just unravel the coat.
Careful, don't touch it.
Steady now, old boy.
Here we are.
The moonlight just fell on it as she snatched it. We had not ourselves touched that bit of metal, and I have thought since that it was just as well. In another moment, Paxton was out of the hole again and busy shoveling back the soil with hands that were already bleeding. She would have none of our help, though, and it was much the longest part of the job to get the place to look undisturbed. Yet I don't know how, but she made a wonderful success of it. At last she was satisfied, and we turned back.
Rightio. Let's go.
Right you are.
I say, Paxton, you've left your coat there. See?
Oh, yes, that won't do.
No, that isn't my coat.
Well, of course it is. I mean, look.
It's here in my hand.
Huh? What? Where's it gone?
Well, we got out onto the road and came rapidly back that way. It was well before 12 when we got in, trying to put a good face on it and saying, well, Long and I, oh, what a lovely night it was for a walk. The staff were on the lookout for us, and we made remarks like that for their edification as we entered the hotel. The fellow gave another look up and down the seafront before he locked the front door and said, You didn't meet many people about, I suppose, sir? No, indeed, not a soul, I said, at which I remember Paxton looked oddly at me. Only I thought I see someone turn quickly up the station road after you, gentlemen, he said. Still, you was 3 together. I don't suppose you meant mischief. I didn't know what to say. Long merely said good night, and we went off upstairs to our room, promising to turn out all lights and to go to bed in a few minutes. Well, that's the crown back safe.
Yes, it's back.
And yes, you've done better not to have ever touched it, but no real harm has been done. And we shall never give this away to anyone who would be so mad as to go near it. Isn't that right, Henry?
Most definitely.
Besides, don't you feel better yourself? I don't mind confessing that on the way there, well, I was very much inclined to take your view about being followed. But coming back, it wasn't the same thing, was it? You've absolutely nothing to trouble yourself about.
But I'm not forgiven. I've got to pay for that miserable sacrilege still. I know what you're going to say. The church might help. Yes, but it's the body that has to suffer. It's true I'm not feeling that he's waiting outside for me just now, but... Good night, gentlemen. Thank you for coming with me.
Will you join us tomorrow?
Oh yes, please do. Do you golf?
I have in the past, but I'm not sure I should care for it tomorrow.
Get plenty of rest, and join us in the sitting room tomorrow, we insist. We could go for a walk, or you could join us for cards.
That would be nice. A day like that would be nice. Well, anyway, good night.
You'll wonder why we didn't insist on accompanying her to her room or seeing her safe into the care of brothers or someone. The fact was, she had nobody. She had had a flat in the next town, but lately had made up her mind to settle for a time in Sweden, and she had dismantled her flat and shipped off her belongings and was whiling away a fortnight or 3 weeks before making a start. Anyhow, we didn't see what we could do better than sleep on it, or not sleep very much, as was my case, and see what we felt like tomorrow morning. We felt very different, Long and I, on as beautiful an April morning as you could desire, and Paxton also looked very different when we saw her at breakfast. The first approach to a decent night I seem ever to have had, was what she said. But she was going to do as we had settled, stay in probably all the morning and come out with us later. We went to the links, we met some other men and played golf with them in the morning, and had lunch there rather early so as not to be late back. All the same, the snare of death overtook. Whether it could have been prevented, I don't know. I think she would have been got at somehow, do what we might. Nonetheless, I have played these events countless times in my mind. We went straight up to the living room. Paxton was there reading quite peaceably. Long asked if she would join us in around half an hour, and she agreed. We informed her we were off to have baths and would be back in that time. I had my bath first and went and lay down on my bed and slept for about 10 minutes. We came out of our room together, and went to the sitting room. Paxton wasn't there, only her book. Nor was she in her room, nor in the downstairs rooms. We shouted for her. A servant came out and said, "Why, I thought you gentlemen was gone out already, and so did the lady. She heard you were calling from the path there, and run out in the hurry, and I looked out of the coffee room window, but I didn't see you. However, she ran off down the beach that way." Without a word, we ran that way too. It was the opposite direction to that of last night's expedition. It wasn't quite 4 o'clock, and the day was fair, though not so fair as it had been, so that was really no reason, you'd say, for anxiety. With people about, surely a woman couldn't come to much harm. But something in our look as we ran out must have struck the servant, for he came out on the steps and pointed and said, "Yes, that's the way she went." We ran on as far as the top of the shingle bank and there pulled up. There was a choice of ways, past the houses on the seafront or along the sand at the bottom of the beach, which, the tide being now out, was fairly broad. Or, of course, we might keep along the shingle between those two tracks and have some view of both of them, only that was heavy going. We chose the sand, for that was the loneliest, and someone might come to harm there without being seen from the public path.
James! There she is!
Where?
Up ahead!
Oh, there's someone. Paxton! Paxton! Paxton!
She mustn't hear us!
Or it's not her.
Blast it, it must be!
What's she doing? I can't see for this bloody mist.
It's come out of nowhere. I think she's running after someone. She's waving her arms, I think.
Paxton! Paxton!
Hang on, these tracks. Someone's barefoot, it looks like.
Barefoot? They're practically like bone.
What? James!
And these tracks joining them, are they... yes, they look like women's shoe prints. It must be her. Why is she running after them?
What are you saying, James?
I don't like this, Henry. I don't like this at all. Paxton!
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 The notion of Paxton running after anything like this and supposing it to be the friend she was looking for was very dreadful to us. You can guess what we fancied, how the thing she was following might stop suddenly and turn round on her, and what sort of face it would show, half seen at first in the mist, which all the while was getting thicker and thicker. And as I ran on, wondering how the poor wretch could have been lured into mistaking that other thing for us, I remembered her saying, "He has some power over your eyes." And then I wondered what the end would be, for I had no hope now that the end could be averted, and, well, there is no need to tell all the dismal and horrid thoughts that flitted through my head as we ran on into the mist. It was uncanny, too, that the sun should still be bright in the sky and we could see nothing. We could only tell that we were now past the houses and had reached that gap there is between them and the old Martello Tower. When you are past the tower, you know, there is nothing but shingle for a long way, not a house, not a human creature, just that spit of land, or rather shingle, with the river on your right and the sea on your left. But just before that, just by the Martello Tower, you remember there is the old battery close to the sea. I believe there are only a few blocks of concrete left now, the rest has all been washed away, but at this time there was a lot more, though the place was a ruin. Well, when we got there, we clambered to the top as quick as we could to take breath and look over the shingle in front if by chance the mist would let us see anything. But a moment's rest we must have. We had run a mile at least. Nothing whatever was visible ahead of us, and we were just turning by common consent to get down and run hopelessly on, when we heard what I can only call a laugh, and if you can understand what I mean by a breathless, a lungless laugh, you have it. But I don't suppose you can. It came from below and swerved away into the mist.
Oh, the mist! Good Lord.
Oh, God.
Jesus Christ.
We bent over the wall. Paxton was there, at the bottom. You don't need to be told that she was dead. Her tracks showed that she had run along the side of the battery, had turned sharp round the corner of it, and, smalled out of it, must have dashed straight into the open arms of someone who was waiting there. Her mouth was full of sand and stones, and her teeth and jaws were broken to bits. I only glanced once at her face. At the same moment, just as we were scrambling down from the battery to get to the body, we heard a shout and saw a man running down the bank of the Martello Tower. He was the caretaker stationed there, and his keen old eyes had managed to descry through the mist that something was wrong. He had seen Paxton fall. Had he, we asked, caught sight of anybody attacking our friend? He could not be sure. We sent him off for help and stayed by the poor dead woman till they came with the stretcher. It was then that we traced out how he had come on the narrow fringe of sand under the battery wall. The rest was shingle, and it was hopelessly impossible to tell whither the other had gone. What were we to say at the inquest? It was a duty we felt not to give up there and then, the secret of the Crown to be published in every paper. I don't know how much you would have told, but what we did agree upon was this, to say that we had only made acquaintance with Paxton the day before, and that she had told us she was under some apprehension of danger at the hands of a man called William Ager. Also that we had seen some other tracks besides Paxton's when we followed her along the beach. But of course, by that time, well, everything was gone from the sands. No one had any knowledge, fortunately, of any William Ager living in the district. The evidence of the man at the Martello Tower freed us from all suspicion. All that could be done was to return a verdict of wilful murder by some person or persons unknown. Paxton was so totally without connections that all the inquiries that were subsequently made ended in a no thoroughfare. But of course you know this, the gaps in the official story and the local gossip mill are what brought you to me after all. And I have never been at Sebra or even near it since. I hope you tread carefully if you do decide to go. After all, I don't think there'll be much for you to see all these years later. Perhaps it's time for another cup. But I do hope this has all been helpful. I'm afraid you don't have much evidence other than my words and the records you've already seen. Long is dead, of course, and it did happen so many years ago. But nonetheless, the best of luck in your research. It has been a pleasure to meet you, Professor Troughton. You've been listening to a Shadows at the Door production. Story by M.R. James, adaptation by Mark Nixon. Performances by Ilana Charnel Gelbart, David Ault, Jake Benson, score by Nico Vitesi, production by Mark Nixon. Production copyright Shadows at the Door Publishing 2020. If you enjoyed this production, please consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll see you very soon.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. All the links to the show you've just heard are in the show notes below. Definitely check them out and subscribe to their feeds if you like what you heard today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leviathan Presents, and maybe you've discovered a new show that you'd like to binge. We're looking forward to bringing you some more amazing audio dramas to discover and letting you meet some of the phenomenally talented creators that are driving this renaissance in audio fiction today. Stay subscribed to this feed for more installments of Leviathan Presents, as well as all the full episodes of the Leviathan Chronicles, the Rapscallion Agency, the Invenios Expedition, and all the other spin-offs we have planned. This is Christoph, signing off for now. Thanks again for listening. I'll be talking to you all real soon. Bye now.